Carolyn O'Connor, about to appear in Mack and Mabel in Los Angeles, the El Portal Theater. Welcome to Cultural Attaché.
Thank you so much, Craig.
I want to start by asking you about something, that Jerry Herman said. He said that Mack and Mabel was his favorite work of all of his works, but it was sadly his least successful. You were in the 1995 London production in which you received an Olivier nomination of the musical. What do you think? Why do you think the show didn't find an audience, and what did the audiences miss by not seeing it?
Well, our experience in London was actually not too bad because we started out of town. We were at the Leicester Haymarket Theatre and we did like a rep run, about a month probably before we came into the West End. And I think that we ran for about 7 months, maybe a little bit more, which I think is probably the longest run of Mack and Mabel. I mean, London really took it, under its wing. The show had been very well received. I'll tell you why, because Torval and Dean, the skaters, had done a routine to the overture of Mack and Mabel for the Olympics, and it really had struck a chord with everybody in England, and they fell in love with the music. So I think we got lucky that we had a bit of a hook there. But as far as the show's concerned, look, I think that theatre is quite often like fashion. And I think during that time, I think it opened around 74, didn't it, originally?
Yes.
You know, 74, 75, weren't we getting things like a chorus line and sort of more modern musicals, maybe even Chicago, those sorts of shows seemed more like a revival, whereas the modern shows like a chorus line, Godspell and things like that, it was just fashion in theatre was changing. I just really believe that sometimes, you see it now. Sometimes there'll be 6 revivals in a row. Suddenly that's the thing. And then suddenly brand new musicals. So I just think maybe the timing wasn't quite right. And I totally agree with him. I mean, I have to say, I think that Mack and Mabel is one of his finest scores. I'm a big fan, but it's just stunning.
Well, it's interesting because Mack and Mabel share something in common with Stephen Sondheim's Merrily We Roll Along. They have both been considered some of their composers' finest works with their best songs. But until this season's Broadway revival of Merrily We Roll Along, the show wasn't fully embraced.
Yes.
You
Well,
know,
we saw that with Chicago, didn't we? It was a magnificent show. But then they did this kind of modern, sexy version, and all of a sudden it was a hit. So, theatre can be quite fickle, can't it? And you can't predict anything. You really can't. And so it's wonderful that now the show is being done and people are getting to experience this beautiful work.
right. Well, late in the second act of Mack and Mabel, there's a song I Promised You a Happy Ending, and Max sings, "If you've had a bad beginning, you'll come out winning in the close." Do you think Mack and Mabel will ultimately have a happy ending the same way Merrily We Roll Along has?
Possibly. I mean, of all the places to do the show, Los Angeles is probably the right place because of the subject matter, it being about a movie director and a movie studio. So, I mean, if we can't do it here and for it to be understood and appreciated, then it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, I love that era. I love the story. I love a true story, anything that's based on truth. So I think it could, yes, I think it could be a show like those that comes around and people go, wait a minute, this is a sensational, script, an amazing score. It's been criticized quite a bit over the years, but I think I have to say Scott is doing a really sensational job of the show.
Now, I referenced the 1995 production that you did in the UK. That was when Jerry Herman was still with us. How
Yes.
involved was Jerry Herman during that production?
Well, he came to Leicester. Nobody knows where Leicester is. It's about an hour and 12 minutes away from London by train. But he came to Leicester to be with us during the rehearsal period, which you can imagine was absolutely thrilling. There's nothing quite like having the actual composer in the room. And I have to say, he just had the biggest grin on his face the entire time he was there. I mean, he wasn't incredibly critical because I think he was just so thrilled to be seeing the musical come back to life. He was so supportive, Craig, and just enjoyed the process, and watched Paul Kerrison put this show together. And so, yeah, he was mostly positive. I mean, we did have quite a few script changes during that period because Michael Stewart had passed away, and Francine Pascal had taken over that position for any tweaking or rewrites that were being done. But basically, yes, Jerry just came along, and then opening night, of course, in London, he was there, and it was everything you could possibly dream of.
Right, and it should be noted that Francine Pascal is Michael Stewart's sister, if I've read correctly.
Absolutely, yes, that's correct. Yeah.
And this 1995 production had some of the most, I guess, major changes in the book since Michael's last rewrite of the book.
It's so interesting because we had quite a few changes during the rehearsal period, quite a few, an added duet went into the show. And to be honest, when Scott was talking to me about the show, I said, we did so many changes now, I'm finding it hard to remember which one we actually ended up with, because, they were just trying, I think they listened so much to what had been said and also what had been written, that there was a sort of slight nervousness about how it would be received. You know what I'm saying? And sometimes I just think it's best to just tell the truth, the real story. I mean, it's not a happy ending. That Mabel Norman had a pretty tragic life at the end there, died very young. And, their love was never what it probably could have been. So there was a lot of tweaking and backwards and forwards, and everyone was very nervous. That's the situation with any musical, really.
Well, look, at the title character gets murdered on stage in Hamilton, so certainly we're a little more accustomed to main characters passing away now in the musical.
I know, it's funny, isn't it? Because I read a lot of the old reviews and I thought, gosh, we've had a French Revolution, we've had a Vietnam War, some creepy guy up in an opera house, sort of, just what's the problem with this story? It's actually, not as terrifying as people are making out. It's just a simple, beautiful love story about two incredibly talented people.
Right, and you played one of those talented people in the 1995 production when you played Mabel, which frankly means you get the best songs in the show. But for this production, this concert performance, you'll be singing the role of Lottie Ames.
Yes.
What do you think your perspective was on Lottie Ames in 1995, and how has it shifted now that you're taking on this role?
Well, we had a wonderful actress called Catherine Evans who played the role, and she's had a voice from heaven and was a wonderful dancer. So my recollection of the role is that it was brilliantly done by her, but also a lovely role. And what I like about this female character in the show is that quite often you'll have two female characters sort of against each other or competing with each other, whereas I think it's quite interesting in this show that Lottie becomes quite protective and supportive of Mabel. So it's quite nice to have that sort of dynamic between the characters. And it's just interesting. It's a bit like Velma Kelly, like she's probably doing very well at the studio, and then all of a sudden someone comes along and she starts to lose her position in the studio. But I think she takes it all in her stride, and she's just like it's described in the script. She is really, an old hoofer. Ask her to do anything, she could probably do it. Anything you require. So I really enjoy playing her now. I mean, just because I love the show anyway. It's so strange just sitting and everything's flooding back in the room. Listen, getting quite emotional thinking about it because it was such a great time of my life. So I feel blessed that I'm getting to experience it again, but also to play this other role. I'm loving it, actually. It's tremendous. Yeah.
Right now, Lottie's second act number is "Tap Your Troubles Away." So Carolyn, what do you do to get over your troubles?
Probably that. I love working. I'm a workaholic. I'm never happier than I am when I'm at work. So when I'm at home, I do tend to sing around the house. I've got a little miniature poodle and she'll sing along with me, howl along with me. And even when I tap, she gets, because I bought myself a tap board because I haven't tapped for a while, not since I did Anything Goes. So I bought a tap board and I put it in the house and I've been rehearsing because Scott actually sent me the routine on a video. So I was learning it while I was still in Australia. But yeah, I'd say that. I mean, I've got some lovely friends now I live in Queensland now, it's like God's back garden, and so I spend a lot of time with lovely friends. And but yeah, I'd have to say what makes me happiest is when I'm actually working.
Now, I believe your dog's name is Lola.
It is.
Does she have a passion? Does she have a passion for Damn Yankees material?
Oh well, I actually sing the Barry Manilow song to her. Is that the Barry? Am I thinking of the right song?
Yeah,
Her name is Lola.
Copacabana.
She was a
Yeah,
showgirl. Yeah,
Copacabana.
yeah, Copacabana. We sing that quite a bit, and I actually did play. I did Lola in Damn Yankees, so I did have a fondness for that name and for that show. Yeah.
Makes sense. Now, you have previously done a concert version of Mack and Mabel in Melbourne in 2001. You also did a concert version of My Favorite Year at 54 Below in 2017. What are the differences for you as an actor in doing a concert performance as opposed to a fully realized production?
I think it's. I don't think it's that different, to be honest with you. I think it's pretty much the same. I mean, for me, I've done a few of those sort of encore type productions as well in Australia. You know, like our company's called the Production Company. It actually doesn't exist now. I think after 20 years they stopped. But I think you approach it in the same way. You know, you still try to find the character, a full bodied character. Um, of course, there's not as much choreography when you do it in that way. But you have to do a lot of the learning in advance. You know, you really do. It's not the same experience as when you're in a rehearsal room for 4 weeks. So you do a lot of homework and then you're all thrown together. And I remember when we did My Favorite Year in particular, I was such a big fan of Richard Kind. I could barely contain myself. And so I was trying to act really casual and calm about it all. But I was so excited to be working with him. So just sometimes, even with Dermot, you know, in our production, it's just getting over that initial sort of like, oh my God, look who I'm working with. You know, I still get very starstruck.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Now you've referenced Velma Kelly for good reason. I saw you in Chicago at Her Majesty's Theater in Melbourne, and I saw you in the show twice. Because my probably, if not my closest, yeah, probably my closest friend was the resident director on that, Lee Biolis. So I went to visit him. So I bring up Chicago again because that's a musical from the 70s, like Mack and Mabel. You've also played Cassie in a chorus line. You've played Phyllis in Follies. Some of the greatest musicals that we've ever had came out of the 1970s. Do you think that musicals from that time offer performances and audiences more than perhaps musicals do today?
Yes, I do. I can't really put my finger on it. I mean, I remember when I moved to England in the 80s, I really noticed that the sort of star kind of vehicles were not the important issue anymore. It was that the show was becoming the star, not the roles, not the sort of roles that you aspire to play. And I do think that we got to the end of the 70s and they stopped writing things in that capacity. You know, normally you would see the name of a star above the title, or you would know who are playing particular roles and you would want to go to see them in the show. That changed in the 80s, I think in England particularly, because you didn't see a name on a poster anymore. So I don't think they wrote the shows in the same way where it was when you depend on who is leading the show, which is a shame because it gave you something to aspire to. You know, when you thought of the people that played the roles before you, I mean, I've always grown up going, oh my God, I would love to play that part that, you know, so and so played, or, you know, so yeah, I think the fashion definitely changed and the roles, even though they were still important, they weren't sort of seen in the same capacity anymore.
Well, you mentioned roles that you'd like to play based on who else had played them. What are those roles?
Oh, well, I did Gypsy, you know, and I loved Ethel Merman growing up. I used to listen to her all the time because to me, when I was a little girl growing up in Australia, I was probably about 11. I've got actually a cassette of me singing Rose's Turn with Ethel. It's funny to me because I didn't want to play Baby June or Louise. I wanted to play Mama Rose, but I just loved the sound. And I remember thinking, that must be what Broadway is, because I didn't know what Broadway was. I used to listen to the albums and think, that sound, you know, that big orchestra, and you could hear the character coming across. I couldn't see them, but I could tell it, you know, every emotion. So yeah, for sure. Ethel, for instance. I mean, of course, Angela Lansbury in probably everything. And you know, and when you get to do Rose and you get to do Mrs. Lovett, and Cheetah Rivera, of course, probably my greatest inspiration, because she was also such a magnificent dancer. And I did 4 of her shows, I think: West Side Story, Chicago, The Ring, and Kiss the Spider Woman. So my friend said, you just got Dear World left now. That you just have to wait to do Dear World. So all of those women inspire me. And you know, the dream is that you get to create a role that somebody else would like to play in the future. That would be the dream, really.
Well, there's still time, isn't there?
I hope so. I mean, that would be, as much as I love doing revivals, it would be wonderful to create something from scratch.
Well, you mentioned Cheetah Rivera, who just recently passed away, and I know on your Instagram account you have a picture with her, and I'm
Mm.
wondering what your conversations, your experiences were with Cheetah Rivera.
Well, I met her in Australia first years ago. She came out to do a cabaret in Australia, and of course I went to see that. And then she came, you know, some years later, and I went again like a stalker. But I did meet her in, I think, in America, because I knew her assistant Rosie quite well. Just from many years ago, I met Rosie. She was sharing a flat with one of the guys that I was in the rink with in London. So I met Rosie first, and then I met Cheetah in New York. And those photos you're talking about were taken because she agreed to do a little sort of meet and greet and some photographs to help us promote the rink that was going on in London at the Southwark Playhouse. And it was incredibly generous of her, because I mean, I don't know her that well. Once again, in her presence, I became very shy, and I didn't know what to say or what to do, because, you know, when you admire someone that much, it's very hard to feel comfortable and natural. I just was gushing over her. So what a wonderful experience that was for me, to spend that that little bit of time with her that day, and that she was so generous. Yeah, amazing. I just love her. So God bless you, Cheetah. Just loved her.
Yeah, I had two experiences with her, and she was just amazing both times.
Yeah.
She was really lovely. You also
Mm,
have the distinction of having been in Baz Luhrmann's Moulin Rouge uh,
yeah.
as Nini, which means you get Tango Roxanne as your big on-screen moment. I'm
Yeah.
sure you've seen the stage musical by now, which is conquering the world with what I call, you know, Moulin Rouge the film on steroids, because of the vast number of songs. I didn't know that you could out Baz, but somebody has found a way to do it.
Yes. And
Um,
now there's a rumor going around that he might actually turn the musical into a movie, even though it was already a musical movie, this version perhaps into a movie. So,
right. So why do you think Moulin Rouge resonates with people as strongly as it does?
oh, look, I have to say, Craig, there has been, for me, there are people who didn't particularly like the movie. You know, I think it's one of those situations where you don't, or you absolutely adore it. You know, it's like or loathe. But I think, well, the music primarily has to be part of it, because of the recognition. I mean, everybody feels comfortable when they hear something that they recognize. What do they say? Familiarity breeds content. Content. Is that right? Is that the
No,
saying anymore?
contempt. It's contempt.
Oh, okay.
The
Beg your pardon.
opposite of that.
That's,
So maybe for
that's
some
not a good
people,
quote.
maybe for some people, you know, the fact that Moulin Rouge, you know, still thrives is a problem for them.
Maybe, but I think it's hard for me to talk, you know, to think of it in that way, because the experience for me was one of the best experiences of my life. So it's just a hugely positive thing that happened, a very unexpected thing that happened too. I didn't think at that stage of my life that, as a dancer, because I was in my late 30s, that I was going to get the call to do something like that. And it took a year of our lives to shoot, because he's such an incredible genius, and you know, that's how long it takes for him to create vision, and also just the dancing, the singing, the costumes. I mean, it was just so lavish. I don't think we'd seen a musical movie in quite some years, and so he brought them back into fashion again. Because since then, as you've probably realised, a lot of other musicals have been done, and I think it was because of that. It sort of kick-started a lot of people thinking, "Hey, why aren't we doing this?"
Right. I will tell you a story if you don't know, because I worked on the film in terms of the behind the scenes and I wrote and produced an HBO First Look special about the movie and things like that.
Did you?
And I remember that Baz was calling the movie, rightly so, a musical, and the studio did not want it to be called as a musical, so he started calling it an opera. And then the studio relented and let him call it a musical because the last thing they wanted to do was convince people that this expensive movie was an opera.
Yes. Well, it is. It's a musical, and it. God, it's unlike any other too, like you say, with the amount of music that's involved. And I went to see it. I didn't see it until quite recently, actually. I hadn't seen it at all until it came to Brisbane, because I live in Queensland now. And I went to the opening night, and I hadn't seen Baz in a very, very long time. And I went to the party, and we had a good old boogie, had a good dance, and we had a few champagnes, and we all did. The whole audience had a blast. So I was glad I got to see it, because I think it's actually just closed in Australia now.
Well, and you had to have been impressed with what Tango Roxanne became. I mean, that I don't know how the dancers do that on stage 8 shows a week.
No, no, God, no. It was great to just have to learn it, film it, done. Not have to. Well, that's musicals for you. I've been doing musicals for 40 years, and I was talking about this yesterday with Dermot Mulroney, and saying, because obviously he's a film star and he's there in the room with us, and he's saying, "Wow," he's looking at all the dancers and everything, going, "Oh my God." I said, that I think the hardest part for us is the repetition. It's the having to do it 8 times a week for maybe a year, maybe longer, depending on the success of the show or if you stay. But that's a discipline that we have, and I've always loved that, to be honest with you. To continue to do as the best you can, and if you can do better, then great. But yes, it's beautifully done. I thought the choreography was magnificent in Moulin Rouge.
Yeah. Now, you just referenced that you've been doing this for 4 decades at this point, which means you've had good times and bum times, and you've seen them all. So my question to finish our conversation, Carolyn, is when you look back on your career, does time heal everything that wasn't so great and offer perspective on those things that were?
Yes, I think so. I mean, our business is. I actually mentioned this to Scott last night. In a little message, he was talking about how exhausted he was, and but how he still loves it. And I remember the George Burns quote, which was that show business is a hideous bitch goddess, and I thought that's so true, because you love it, and it's very hard work, and it can be very disappointing as well. You have to hang in there. You never know. Who knows who's going to produce what? There's no plan. You just always have to be ready, to be prepared, and to be able to go for something. So I think that time does heal everything. Sometimes you have great disappointments. I know over the years you think, gosh, why didn't I get to do that? And then something else marvelous will come along. So yes, it's just the unexpected is always a wonderful surprise, and this certainly was an unexpected surprise. So may they long continue.